You've arrived at the perfect destination. Welcome to Mainly Facts. In case you happen to miss out on any of our videos, this compilation is tailor-made for you. Whether you're seeking refuge from boredom, desiring an engaging backdrop, or simply looking to while away the hours, you've come to the right place. Don't forget to subscribe to this channel and activate the notification button. And now, with no further delay, brace yourself, for the adventure begins now. Teachers, what clicked about a pupil after meeting their parents? Viewer edition. Now I know that we're going to have more pupils than actual teachers here, but I fully accept that. We've got a little bit of a younger audience, and I'm excited for some of your stories. Though, quick content warning, this topic can lead to some discussion of people who are going through kind of abusive, rough situations. And so you might be hearing a little bit of that. Nothing too terribly descriptive, but just be warned. Story 1. When I was a kid, I had a very odd speech impediment, to the point that the teacher considered putting me in speech therapy. So she called up my parents to have a meeting in person about it, and that was when she realized my mother has a southern drawl and my dad is English, so my impediment was the result of their accents mixing. Needless to say, that was her oh moment, and I still look back on it and laugh. Alright, it's time for me to make a real butt out of myself, because we need to combine a nice southern drawl with a proper with an English accent. There's so many different English accents. Which one do you choose? I like to think of like Southern drawl and Cockney being together, just like, "Oh, governor, it's there." What am I doing? I sound mad. Like, cool, blimey, Cockney accent, but then you add a little bit of the Southern drawl to it. No, I don't know what that is. I'm so curious. But I'm sure that, that could be pretty fun. What a wonderfully eclectic mix of accents you must have going. That's awesome. And I'm sorry if I offended you trying to do it, because I did a very bad job. Story 2. As someone who was diagnosed with ADHD as an adult and has a parent who exhibits clear signs of it as well, Story 6 makes me kind of sad. ADHD kids are told all the time that we just don't seem to care, or that if you just focused, you could do so much. But we're focusing as best we can. We do care so much, but when you have zero coping skills and don't even have any knowledge of why you are the way you are, it makes it that much harder to change anything. Because tactics that work for non-ADHD people do not work at all for those of us with it. That teacher saw the warning signs and ignored them, just like so many other teachers do. And now that kid will grow up feeling like they've wasted their life and their potential. They'll feel like it's their fault for not doing enough when they have no control over how their mind works. Just unfortunate how common that is for warning signs to be ignored or dismissed as laziness and not caring. I am 39 years old, and I first had my therapist posit that she is quite confident I have ADHD and need to get tested at 39 years old. And it answered a lot of things for me, and I can relate to this stuff. It is true. The ADHD brain just works differently. Telling them to focus is like telling a person with clinical depression to just not be sad. It's meaningless. The book that I have been listening to, I don't read with my eyes. I do enough of that here. I do audiobooks. But it's called, I believe it's called Delivered from Distraction, by a doctor who has ADHD. And folks, if you think you might be struggling with it, or if you are, listen to that book. It has a lot of positive things to say about ADHD and some tips and stuff about what you could do and, how you should seek out help, form like healthy habits and stuff. Yeah, you really do have to approach the ADHD brain in a very different way. And thankfully, I've learned my own coping mechanisms in my 39 years. But hopefully some of you younger folks won't have to go that long.
Story 3. I was the student that was always engaged in class, and one day in, I think, 4th grade, I suddenly stopped. After a couple days, the teacher pulled me aside to ask if I was all right. I told her the truth that I'd been getting sent to bed without food, not because we couldn't afford it, but as a form of punishment. I can remember the look on her face. She knew, I could tell. The next day, I got beat because CPS was called. CPS didn't do anything because she showed the groceries and claimed most of it was for me. After that, I went to school again and avoided the teacher. I was scared of getting beat again, but in the end, I couldn't avoid her for long because I ended up hugging her and crying about what happened. I guess they got called again because we moved cross-country after. This was constant and always with the excuse of either moving in with a boyfriend, staying with family to help them, or staying with her ex/my brother's father. Yeah, that's my childhood in a nutshell. Story 4. Throughout my childhood, I lived in a very toxic household with an emotionally, mentally, and sometimes physically abusive father, and an incredibly emotionally damaged mother. I was the quiet kid who didn't have a lot of friends, and when they did, I never got really close to them. My 5th grade teacher noticed this when I literally started hysterically laughing at this kid who complained about how his weekend was terrible and that he hated his parents because they took his phone away. She pulled me out of class and I practically vented to her about how my parents treat me, and she called them. The next day I walked into class, bruises all over my arms and legs and multiple cuts on my fingers. I still have effing scars, and she called CPS. They didn't gather enough evidence and concluded it as a misunderstanding. I was 9 to 10 through 5th grade. I still live with my parents, but now that I'm older and know how to defend myself / stand up for myself, the physical abuse has died down a bit. And sometimes I wonder if I didn't have enough courage to talk to my 5th grade teacher about it, I would have either bleed out, or have killed myself by now. So thank you, 5th grade teacher. Thank you.
I'm really happy to hear that that teacher was able to reach out to you. And I'm really, really sorry for what your home life is like. And yeah, sometimes I can't give just like easy advice for how to get out of that kind of stuff for people who are in those situations. I mean, talking to someone you can trust. Sadly, we're probably going to hear a few stories about Child Protective Services not dealing with an issue that's there because sometimes evidence isn't there, and that sucks. That's terrible. But the best I can say is that things can get better. Life can get better. You can choose who you associate with, and that even goes for family. But for teachers like this who try and reach out and do something, here's some proof. You are helping. That kind of stuff really does matter to these people.
What was the incident that happened at your school, Viewers Edition?
Oh, there was just one incident at my high school, and that incident was me. Not really. I was a pretty boring teen. No, that's not true. I was in drama. We got messing around. Also, definitely went to the principal's office after I was picking those locks, and I might have more to say about this topic than I realized. Maybe I'll bring it up. Story 1. There was a girl who apparently had an iron deficiency, but she didn't tell anyone but her friends and teachers, so not many people knew, but basically one time we had a substitute teacher who was a bit of a bee. The girl was feeling kind of dizzy, so she raised her hand to ask to go to the nurse to go take her meds. And the sub denied her, so the girl told her to check the sub plan so that she would know why it was important to go to the nurse, but the sub refused and told her to wait. Fast forward to the end of class, the girl gets up to leave and falls right back down. Straight to the floor. Blood everywhere. Kids freaking out. Sub freaking out and trying to get help. Her chin had split open and she was surprisingly calm. They took her to the front office, and at this point she was trying to tell them not to call an ambulance and that she was fine and her mom could take her to the hospital, but the staff told her no because legally they have to call an ambulance. So she was freaking out, telling them not to unless they were paying the medical bills, but during all this her mom had already gotten to the school and she ended up just going to the hospital with her. And in the end, all was good, but about 25 kids were traumatized that day. I was the girl. First off, I am sorry that happened to you. That sucks. but I'm glad that hopefully you're okay now. Second, screw subs who are jerks. I've known a couple people who were substitute teachers in my life, most of them very wonderful people. One of them would be this kind of person, and I guess I'm not going to say anything more about them than that, but they sucked. Story 2. My best friend was a lesbian and had a crush on my other best friend. My other best friend was raised in a very Catholic family and was told any sin was one where people go to hell for. Didn't agree with the family. We had a school dance, middle school by the way, and as a way of rebelling, kissed first best hard and took the shirt/bra off. Everyone stopped. I had, for some reason, expected this. Video was taken and sent to both friends' families. Second best friend was nearly killed from parents at school. Second girl was saved by a gay guy. We all cheered and the second girl's parents were arrested. First and second girl are married. Gay guy is married. I'm single and loving it. We are all a friend group now. This may be one of my new favorite origin stories for a friend group. I know a bunch of you were already friends before. Maybe you were all friends before, but as far as I'm concerned, when you're hanging out and new people meet your group, like, how did you guys meet? I hope you tell this story, because that's wonderful. Good for all of you.
Story 3. When I was in 8th grade, one of the social studies teachers was apparently soliciting some girls for nude photos, among other things. When one girl got brave enough to report him, the principal basically guilt-tripped her into taking it all back and threatened to suspend her if she didn't. She had to go into a meeting with her parents and say it was a lie and hug the offending teacher afterwards. It wasn't until years later that the teacher was finally arrested on 30-plus counts of S-abuse. The principal, assistant principal, and a counselor were also charged with failure to report S-abuse. The only reason I know all this is because it was all over the news. I'm pretty sure the teacher is in jail. Not sure about the other administrators, though. Story 4. I was nearly expelled for hacking my middle school's network. Wasn't really a challenge even for the 1990s due to the laughable security. They left the default name for the login as administrator and the default password as password. That was the first time I ever saw a cop facepalm at the sheer idiocy of the adults. The officer pointed out that even kindergartners could come up with something more complicated. I didn't even technically do anything bad, just used my access to play an old shooter game called Marathon with some friends during recess.
A lot of you younger folks really don't know just what a Wild West wasteland the internet was in the 90s. The internet, computers, all that stuff. Like, if you had just a little bit of gumption, you could get into anything as a teenager because we knew these computers better than most adults who knew just nothing. Like, if you think your parents nowadays don't know anything about computers, wow.
Story 5. The story about that crappy kid in the foster system reminded me of something someone said about raising kids. They aren't giving you a hard time, they are having a hard time. While all the adults in that kid's situations didn't want to deal with his problems, he was admittedly making it very difficult. This kid literally couldn't because he didn't know how. This is why good teachers are so invaluable. This kid came from a crappy life situation with a lot of trauma and anger, no facilities or faculties to process it properly, and everyone around him basically said, "Yon yon, good luck." Is anyone really surprised that his reaction was, well, F you too then? Story 6. Our incident was a student releasing 1,000 crickets into the school's main common area. They got into the walls, the kitchen, the furniture, literally everything. It was his senior prank, and the school made him cover the cost of cleaning by paying $1 for each cricket. He went around asking each student for $1 to cover the cost. He likely came out ahead as there were about 2,000 students in the school. Story 7. This was in college, so it wasn't that well known on campus, but everyone in my major knows about it. We got a new teacher in our department, and he was extremely chill, was one of my favorite professors there. A girl in my year had a crush on him, and everyone knew about it, even the teacher. He didn't try to make advances or anything, he was very professional about it. Then it got weirder. The girl found his socials, I believe, and started stalking him. It got to the point where he had to take a restraining order against her. The worst part? His wife worked at the same college. Story 8. A kid in my school, I'll call him Humza, was pretty badly ostracized. It was partly people being mean to him, but he also didn't help himself. He gradually got stranger and stranger, doing stuff like dancing poorly whilst people surrounded him chanting his name. They made fun of him especially for that. Important part, luckily we don't live in the US, so he couldn't commit a shooting, but in chemistry, a class I wasn't in, he gave a speech about how we were all bystanders and he was sick of the lying, the laughter, before whipping out a pair of scissors and trying to stab the kids next to him. They had to leave him locked in a room by himself for hours before his parents came. Can't fully blame him, but doesn't excuse his actions, especially because I know those kids in particular had nothing to do with his bullying.
Okay, so I'm not going to defend Humza's actions. You don't stab kids and get violent, no matter what kind of bullying is happening to you. Now, the bullying of this person, also not cool. Folks, don't bully. Don't take part in, like, weird name calling and chanting and stuff like that. It might seem like harmless, jokey fun, but that stuff can really hurt people. Again, it does not excuse the actions that this person then took, but let's try not to be part of giving people, I don't want to say giving them reasons, because it's not a good reason to do this stuff, but it is what unfortunately gives these people justifications in their minds.
What's the dumbest thing an ex ever said to try and win you back? Viewer edition.
I don't think I've ever had an ex try to win me back. No. Wait, no. No, I think in high school I did have one where her sister tried to talk me back into it. And I did not. The breakup was bad enough the first time because I did it after a week over the phone on her birthday. Not intentionally. I didn't know it was her birthday when I called. I only knew after she dropped the phone crying and her sister screamed at me. That's a true story. Don't break up over the phone, folks. Story 1. My ex accused me of cheating at every corner she could. Note, my dad cheated on my mom when I was a kid, got to see all their explosive arguments, the divorce, the consequences of cheating. So anyway, she would always accuse me with no proof, and I've never cheated. We're at the beach one day, and there's a beach bar with 50 people atop, me and my 10 friends and her friends. I go over to say hi to her, and she's crying. I say, "What's wrong?" Her friends all start shunning me, telling me how crappy I am, what a horrible garbage being I am. Turns out she told her friends I cheated on her, and she caught me under the beach bar making out with some girl. None of it was true, and I had all my friends to back me up because I was playing center in volleyball the entire time. Also, in the end, I found out she cheated on me. You know, I have heard that little thing, that little nugget of wisdom that says that the people who seem most concerned about their partner cheating on them and are paranoid about it tend to, more frequently than not, be cheaters themselves. It's probably why they're paranoid about it, because they know that it can be done. Story 2. A couple years ago on DeviantArt, I had this online girlfriend that lied to me about her age. She said she was over 18, but in reality she was 16. This was when I was 19. I found out her real age and broke up with her because I was not going to risk jail time over that. This was my wake-up call to never do online dating like that again. A fight ensued, and she said, and I quote, "If you loved me, you would fight for our relationship." Sorry. To which I responded, "So you expect me to not be mad at how you lied to me about your age and fight for an illegal relationship?" And she said yes. I blocked her and never did online dating again. My God, I was stupid back then. Yeah, there's a little age range there, and I know there's like weird Romeo and Juliet laws. I don't know how they work, and I don't want to, folks. But like once you turn like 18, 19, it's like you don't want to be with someone who's not technically an adult. It it kind of instantly becomes creepy. So, yeah, I don't blame you for being a little skeeved out. But hey, online dating works out later in life. I met my partner through online dating, well into our 30s, so.
Story 3. The intention was to win me back, but in a weird, twisted way. So in 10th to 11th grade, I had an abusive, volatile relationship with this guy in my class who eventually cheated and then broke up with me to date the younger girl he was cheating on me with. While my pride was stung that he broke up with me via text, I figured I might as well be happy that I was out of the controlling relationship. Then when I was walking the halls my senior year, I saw him with his new girlfriend. I was going to just ignore them, but he called after me and wanted to introduce me to his girlfriend. I played nice up until she left, and he told me point blank after blatantly checking me out, "Damn, if things don't work out with her, I'm going to have to come and find you." Not knowing what else to say, I laughed awkwardly and told him that I was going to be late for class. True to his word, he did try to win me back with heaps of praise and affection after his girlfriend broke up with him. It all seemed schemy and manipulative. Needless to say, I didn't take him back. Story 4. Not my story, but my dad's. So he and his ex were fighting, and she said, "Leave, we're done." And my dad said, "Okay." And my dad described her face going from smug to, "Wait, what?" As he was backing out of her driveway, she came running up to the window and started crying about how she can't live without him and stuff. All my dad said after that was, "You told me to leave, and so I will." 2 years later, after he had me, she called him and said, "Did you ever think of me? Have you ever thought of getting back together?" My dad said, "Nope, not ever. I'm happily married." She didn't take that lightly. She then replied with something among the lines of, "I hate you. I never loved you." In the middle of her rant, my dad hung up laughing so hard, and my dad doesn't laugh much, but he described it as the worst attempt to get someone back.
I never like it when someone in an argument, when they're in a relationship, where they decide to weaponize the idea like, you know what, why don't you just leave if you're so unhappy? Like, if you don't genuinely mean that, if you don't genuinely have like breaking up or divorce or whatever in mind, and you choose to weaponize this idea of breaking up, that's a crappy thing to do. Like, that's a weird low blow in a relationship argument, I think. I mean, maybe I'm wrong. I'd love to know what you all think, but if someone said that to me, it'd be like, wow, we were arguing about something that I didn't think that was, I thought it was like this serious, but apparently it's like this serious if you're going to bring that crap up.
Story 5. When I had a girlfriend in 8th grade, I found she was super clingy, and as much as I loved how loving she was then, she was too clingy for me. I broke up with her, and this year she decided that adding me on Zoom repeatedly was a good idea to try and get me back. I like someone else now, she likes me, but let's just say I've been avoiding my ex as much as I can. Story 6. When I was in 7th grade, I dated my guy best friend. It was going smoothly until he made fun of my eating disorder, any other things I was born with, my autism, ADHD, etc., and the insecurities he gave me. At the time, I was short and younger than a lot of kids. It never bothered me till he mentioned it. But when I called him emo, I was in the wrong because he was insecure about it. May I mind you, he chooses to look and dress in what seems to be emo. After a while, I started hating myself and thinking I was ugly, but he never cared when I told him about it. He ignored me and talked about how sad and miserable his life was. It came to a point where I had to yell at him so he would listen, but he wouldn't take me seriously unless I called him the name of my dead cat. I told him it made me uncomfortable calling him that multiple times, but he brushed it off. Well, it's your cat, not mine. After a few months, we split up. He then sends me a text months later on how he's going to kill himself. So I told my school guardian counselor. He went to a mental hospital, but he texts me after he supposedly had his phone taken away. Be patient, little or young one. I blocked him after that. My life was actually a lot better until he sent me an email. He said I made his life a nightmare and how some ghost will do the same to me. I will admit, I wasn't the best either, so I don't blame him 100%, but at the same time, a nightmare? That's a stretch. He ended up spreading rumors that caused me and my girl best friend to not like each other as much as we did. We've been friends since 2nd grade. Ever since then, I've been living my life and try to be more social just to pee him off. He's an a-hole and he truly needs more than mental help.
Hey, that person sounds like they weren't a good friend or boyfriend. Don't jokingly make fun of attributes about your partner unless you explicitly know that it's like an inside joke you're okay with. And even then, you got to be careful. Like, you know, there can be the things that you know for a fact you and your partner are okay with. You're not trying to like make fun of them or talk down to them. It's just like a quirk between the two of you can make fun of, but you don't do that kind of crap with people. I don't like it. Like, it might start off as a joke, but that's going to chip away at someone.
What's your small town secret stories? Viewer edition.
You want to know the secret to most small towns? It's that they're boring. I grew up and lived in a couple different small towns, and there's usually not much going on, but sometimes they've got some pretty interesting secrets, and I guess you decided to share a few with us. Story 1. There were a set of brothers in my town that were in love with the same girl. They were all like 14, 15. Well, while the girl was saying the one brother, she was feeding the flames of the other brother. I love you but can never be with you as long as your brothers are around, type of thing. Eventually, she convinced the brother that to be together, he'd have to murder his brother, and this kid completely dismembered him and buried him in the front yard. Obviously, they got caught for it, but it completely drove their parents insane. I don't know what happened to the mother, but the father completely snapped. Stuck in the house that his son murdered his other son and then was dragged off to prison. He'd sit outside on Halloween and show you where his son murdered and buried the other, as if telling a ghost story. It was almost as if it were a ghost story that had happened to a previous owner, but he owned it all the same. Crap was nuts. That got extreme real fast. That escalated quickly. Like, she's just like, yeah, I can only be with you if you murder your brother. And then he did. That's horrifying. Folks, nobody's worth murdering over. Don't do that. Story 2. This was one that a lot of people knew about but rarely admitted to knowing, except those in that class. We had a 6th grade science teacher who got tired of hearing snotty 11-year-olds curse in her classroom, a big deal in the 70s. Well, she said we had no idea what we were even saying. So one day our science lesson consisted of her writing every curse word she could think of on the chalkboard and explaining exactly what each meant. She used the correct Latin terms, and then straight up English was quite precise and stern in a way that none of us dared giggle at. But of course, someone talked, and she was fired. She was unapologetic, but the school was terribly embarrassed. That this was a tall, dignified, and elegant woman, wife and mother in her 50s, shocked a lot of people. Hey, in a small town, it was a big thing. You know, I'm all for the belief in the power of words, but not when it comes to cursing. I mean, I don't care if kids say, I guess, the words that I can't say because then YouTube would get mad. I guess I do believe in the power of curse words.
Story 3. A few years back, I had a coworker who was an old military vet and spent his weekends reliving the glory days skydiving. He got diagnosed with cancer and was found dead soon after due to a skydiving accident. The thing is, he was a very experienced skydiver, and his parachute was found rather far from his body. It was ruled an accidental death, but those of us that know him are pretty sure he decided how he wanted to go out and spare his family the pain of watching him wither away slowly. Story 4. My town of Waco, Texas is mostly well known for the Waco Siege, even though it wasn't technically in Waco. It was the biggest town that was nearest to the location by 13 miles. But there are a good amount of hidden secrets and stories about the town. My personal favorite is around a lookout point in the local city park called Lover's Leap. It's one of the most fantastic high points that look out to the lower Brazos Valley, and you can see the river below as well. The story behind the name? Well, there were 2 rival tribes that lived in the area, and the daughter of the chief of one tribe met and fell in love with a warrior of the rival tribe. Both tribes weren't too happy about it and threatened to go to war. Well, to prevent it from happening, the 2 lovers climbed to the top of the cliff, jumped, and fell to their deaths. It's basically a classic Romeo and Juliet kind of legend that is also listed as ghost story as well. They say that if you walk down the riverside trail below the cliff, you could see two wispy, ghostly orbs of the two lovers dancing among the trees, dancing in eternal matrimony. Story 5. When I was little, I remember my mom telling me about how one day a bunch of people in our town had dreams, maybe even the same dream, about being abducted by a UFO and interrogated by aliens, including her. It caused a huge buzz when it happened, but eventually some government official was asked about it, and he made a comment about how ridiculous it was and called it mass hysteria, which seemed to make the people who experienced it too embarrassed to talk about it anymore, and eventually people just forgot. It's not the only time UFOs have been a thing here, though. Apparently my grandpa and a bunch of neighbors saw some kind of weird craft doing maneuvers either near or in the town airport, moving up and down vertically and spinning. Though now people who know about it think that it was probably an experimental military craft. Maybe even an early version of a drone, since the way it was moving was similar to drones. And the maneuvers it was doing are a lot like the ones done when testing how a drone moves. It makes me wonder if the UFO dreams might also have been the result of some shady military tests, since the time when it happened lines up with the tail end of other effed up government tests on unsuspecting civilians.
I mean, I'm not sure which of the reasons I prefer. Aliens? I mean, that's interesting. It's kind of cool, but a little more unknown. Doesn't feel as believable. Government experiments? Well, it feels a little more reasonable, but also kind of uncomfortable because I don't like them doing that stuff. So, let's go with, aliens.
Story 6. I have two small-town secrets about where I live. One, there's a horrible teacher that worked at my high school who even the other teachers hated. It was rumored that her husband is actually rich and owns half the county, which is the only reason the woman is even employed when she's known to have multiple fireable offenses. 2, there's almost no actual crime here, but police funding is based entirely on how many arrests they make. This results in the police where I live falsifying arrest reports and randomly arresting innocent people for no real reason. They've also been known to abuse their power, like when a cop turned on his sirens just to get his lunch from the drive-thru at McDonald's. Bonus secret. According to a bank manager, the richest person in town looks like he's homeless. Being a bank manager, he knows how much money is in everyone's bank account, and apparently this dirty, homeless-looking dude is freaking loaded. He's not allowed to disclose personal information, so no one knows exactly who he was talking about. There are several actual homeless people who live around here. But apparently one guy is secretly the richest person in town and is just super stingy with his money.
You know, I know there are a lot of mixed feelings about the police. I know I've said some things that aren't always, 100% yay cops because, yeah. But I think one thing that we should all agree upon is funding based on arrests. Because when that's basically like, you'll make money based on the service you provide, but we don't want them to have to arrest people. It's such a dumb system. And how can you defend that? If you'd like to defend it, I wouldn't recommend it in the comments. People are going to eat you alive. It's not good.
What's the most effed up way you got back at someone that wronged you? Viewer edition.
I'm a big fan of forgive and forget. You're better off. Who cares if they get their comeuppance? You just got to worry about your own mentality. But sometimes you got to teach someone a lesson. Safely, folks. Can I just stress that you should do it safely? And let's read some stories. Story 1. Quick content warning, folks. This story does deal with a bit of abuse from parents. It's a little bit darker, so if you want to not be subject to that, just scroll on to the timestamp that our editors hopefully put on screen for us, and we'll continue on.
My dad physically and mentally tortured me and my mom for 19 years. He cheated on her with a woman and a man from our church. My dad was a preacher and said he could do what he wanted because God forgives him and so should she. He discovered he could be the center of attention if he was constantly in and out of the hospital for various things, finding loopholes along the way to get painkillers so he could get high whenever he wanted. His final hospital visit, the doctors and nurses weren't buying his crap, so he furiously demanded his discharge. I had to leave school to pick him up and take him home. When we got there, he immediately got in his bed and asked me to hand him his pain pills. I gave it to him and figured since I was home, I'd get some sleep. I was woken up by my mom a few hours later screaming that my dad was dead. I rushed to their bedroom and helped get him off bed so she could do CPR while I called 911. I went back into the bedroom and saw a pill bottle under the bed. He had his 19-year-old son hand him the thing he killed himself with. This effed me up for years after. We sat through the funeral and services for him where we had to listen to all of the stories about how much of a saint he was. Not long after we got his ashes, we moved and decided his remains were not allowed in the house. We put his ashes in a barbecue grill in the backyard, and that's where they stayed for 5 years. One day while moving, I saw a couple squirrels go into the side of the grill, so I opened it after I finished up. His ashes were spread everywhere, mixed with squirrel, pee, and crap, and there was a nest in there too. He was used as a toilet and effed on by vermin. I placed the grill on the curb on trash day and watched it get crushed by the trash truck. So my dad's final resting place is in a dump somewhere. Rest in pee. I mean, the first thing that I will say is it's absolutely not your fault. You weren't getting revenge on this person. You gave him the pain pills that you thought he needed or whatever or whatnot. So I wouldn't feel bad. And he sounds like an awful person. And I am sorry that you had to live with someone like that and deal with that stuff. And I hope that your life has only gotten better. Story 2. My ex-girlfriend cheated on me, so I decided to tell all our mutual friends, mostly her friends that I became friends with, exactly what she thought of them. And I told them I knew secrets only she was meant to know, 'cause I did. I burned all her friend bridges, the ones who knew what she did already didn't like her, and ended up dating her former best friend after that. 5 years, and things are going great. Story 3. Skipped school after a neighbor kid bullied me the day before. Snuck into his house, went to his bathroom, poured out half of his conditioner, and replaced it with Nair. 3 days later, it's summertime, he starts wearing a ski hat. His bully buddy started bugging him about it, then pulls the cap off, along with half his hair. I laughed so hard it started an asthma attack, LOL. I mean, okay, the kid was a bully and doing something that makes them lose their hair for a little while. It's not the worst thing in the world, but I will say, folks, be careful with Nair. It's not an undangerous chemical, especially for something that's going to be going around eyes. Like, yeah, the person's a bully, shave their head, but don't blind them for life. Story 4. So for a long time, my grandmother would treat like absolute crap. She never explained a reason, she just did it. One day she took $53.95 from me when I was 12. She told me the money was to help fix up their house. Found out later that from my grandpa, she didn't do that, so she decided to take my money to buy a bicycle from a yard sale. The bicycle was never used. After finding out about this, I began to tilt every single painting and picture in their house in a way her OCD would notice. She has a really bad OCD. My grandpa found out and said nothing. For an entire summer, I did this and got away with it. Story 5. In 3rd grade, I was a really soft kid. People may think that that's normal for a 3rd grader, but my school had pretty tough kids. I would cry at least 1 or 2 times a month, and there was an a-hole who would always take advantage of it. It was only the first 2 months of school, and I'd only cried once so far, but this guy had at least 15 scenarios where I supposedly cried. This dude would always bring them up when the most people were around, and he would always reenact the crying like my entire family had died and my limbs got cut off. One time on PE day, we were doing a sit-up test, and my water bottle was metal, and it was his turn to do the test. So I stood on the bench next to him and dropped my water bottle square on his balls. And get this, he started crying, and everyone saw. The best part was the people who heard him talk about my crying scenarios in the past never let him forget it. Edit. Jesus, I don't think I've ever gotten so many likes on a comment. Story 6. This wasn't really on purpose, but a guy and girl were having an argument in school. Being the nosy little butt I was, I told them to quiet down and calm down. The girl decked me in the face in response. Thing is, I had a cup of boiling hot water I was going to use to make cup noodles, and I accidentally flung it in her face. Made a big commotion about that. Rumor has it that she got second-degree burns all over her face, which messed it up, and she moved away. Though I'm kind of positive that my water wasn't that hot.
I mean, again, it's not really getting revenge if it's an accident. You had hot water and she hit you and you, and got her with some water. She got revenge on herself. Karma hit her back immediately, She punched rubber karma and the punch came... I'm not saying anything that makes sense. Just ignore me.
Story 7. I was told not to hit girls, so when a girl kept being mean to me at school, I walked into the homeroom and took a note out of my pocket. I then unfolded it as I sat across from her. It was a letter she wrote to her crush. I got her to agree to stop bullying me in order to keep my mouth shut. And if you want to know where I got it in the first place, me and her crush had PE together. Story 8. I used to have a neighbor kid who used to bully me, and I had a fire ant colony, a hobbyist ant keeper. I released the ants in the soil under the fence between mine and their yard, technically allowed since it was a local caught colony and the release was in my own backyard. The bully got stung at least 3 times over the next few weeks, and after that never messed with me again. Teachers, what was the best smart butt response from a student you have heard? Viewer edition.
I love smart buttery. So fun story for me on this one. It's actually the best response from a teacher to a student, as I was in Algebra 2, and my teacher, Mr. H., very, very funny teacher. We had a good rapport, and we could, joke, back and forth or whatever. And I can't remember what he said, but we were talking, and he made a real smart butt response. And so... the whole class kind of laughed along with him, and I just shook my head and went, smart butt. To which he just stared at me and went, better to be a smart butt than a dumb butt. Obviously, we didn't use the word butt, but it was pretty great. I respected him a lot. Story 1. I remember back in elementary school, I needed to go to the bathroom while 2 of my female teachers were talking. I walked up to them and asked politely if I could leave as I needed to pee. Older teacher ignored me and told the younger one, "See, that's how you know they're lying when they cross their legs like that." So I peed in her trash can in front of the entire class for what must have been 4 solid minutes. I needed to go about 2 hours prior. I was given detention, and my father was called. He came a few hours later and asked why I was in detention. She tells him that I peed in her trash can, and I clarified that I asked them, that she called me a liar and then ignored me. He looked into the half-filled trash can of pee, then back to the teacher, walked over to it, dumps it out on the floor by her desk, turns back to her and says, "He wasn't lying, you bee," swore at her in at least 3 different languages, and said if she ever pulled that kind of negligent crap again, he'd see that she is fired. I had to say prompts to you and your dad, though, folks, I would advise against this one just because if you're going to pee in a trash can, you're going to be exposing yourself in public, which that can get you in trouble that you don't want or deserve. But I still agree, and I despise any teacher who doesn't allow students to go to the bathroom or is really weirdly strict with that crap. Screw off, teachers. If a kid says they want to go to the bathroom, you let them go to the bathroom. Prisons let people go to the bathroom, for God's sake. Story 2. Kinda flipping the situation here, but I remember in 7th grade math when we were once crafting a hypothetical scenario with a coin flip. We were talking about how it landed on heads or tails was each a 50% chance, to which I promptly responded, couldn't it technically land on its side too? The teacher didn't really care and barely even gave any acknowledgement, but people proceeded to joke about what I said for the rest of that class without making fun of me for it. That's one of my proudest moments.
Story 3. I'm not sure if this counts, but in my chemistry class, we were learning about ionic bonds and valence electrons. We had this practice where we'd get assigned an element with 1, 2, 6, or 7 valence electrons, and we had to find someone with the amount our element needed to become stable. After the teacher finished explaining the instructions, I raised my hand and said, "So you're asking us to do a bonding exercise?" He just stopped, sighed, then he told me that he was going to use that joke in the future. Stupid science puns almost always elicit a reaction. I'm just glad this one wasn't combustion. I really don't want anyone blowing up on me. Story 4. The male teacher and a girl going to the loo reminds me of a story. We had a male sub, and one of the girls in my class asked to go to the toilet, also known as a loo for some people who are confused. Anyway, the sub says yes, but then we all hear a rapper. He then says to the girl, "Look, if you're going to eat in here, you can do that, but you have to share with the whole class." She then whips out a tampon, throws it to his face, and says, "You want some?"
Teachers, you gotta stop being so reactionary with this stuff, because it only is gonna make you look like a dingus in the end. A girl asked you if she could go to the bathroom and you heard crinkling and you couldn't stop for just 1 second to think, maybe it's not candy or food. You had to immediately jump in like that, and look where it got you.
Story 5. I remember in middle school, I had a young teacher that was new to teaching and thus was on a bit of a power trip. She'd like to give out detentions for any little thing she could. I inevitably got detention along with a huge chunk of my class one day. When we showed up for detention, she told us the rules of detention, saying, "This is detention. You will sit with your eyes in front and you will not speak whatsoever," emphasizing the no speaking part. She then sat at her desk and about 2 minutes later asked us, "So did everyone have a good weekend?" My classmates nodded and murmured in agreement, then fell silent immediately. I didn't react whatsoever and just ignored her question. When she noticed I didn't respond, she asked me specifically, "What about you? Did you have a good weekend?" I just stared at her and didn't answer. She responded with, "No, okay." Then another minute later, she said to me in front of everyone, "You know, it's polite if someone asks you a question, you respond." To which I broke my silence with, "Oh, I'm sorry, I thought this was detention and we weren't supposed to speak whatsoever." What's funnier is, I wasn't trying to be smart about it. That was my honest answer because I thought she was testing me and trying to get an excuse to tack on another detention since she was on a power trip. It wasn't until after detention, when my classmates gave me kudos, that I realized that was a pretty smart aleck response.
Teachers on a power trip is just so frustrating. And teachers, the best thing I can tell you is don't get a big head. Don't think of you're in charge. You do need to be an authority figure, but you also can't let that kind of power go to your head because students are not going to like you, and if they don't like you, they're not going to learn from you, and then you fail to do your job. But also, yeah, I can respect the way that you handled that, though. Just yeah, you know what? You said no talking, so I will not talk. Yeah, if a teacher's going to be hyper strict like that, then use their words against them.
Story 6. In English class, we'd just finished taking a surprisingly short test. I was one of those gifted, depressed kids that tests well, so I was among the first students done. The test had only been about 5 multiple-choice questions compared to this teacher's usual 15 or so. I announced my surprise by saying, "That was over really quickly." Another student, "That's what she said." My teacher, "Maybe to you." High school was fun. Story 7. This is my favorite story from my AP US History class so far. One of my favorite teachers ever. He pokes fun at the students if they say something stupid, all in good fun, of course. We were reviewing the policies of some founding father presidents, Thomas Jefferson, I think, and he mentioned that they expanded part of the army and asked us which part it could be, like what branch. Knew it wasn't the Army, same president cut funds for the Army, or the Navy, didn't exist yet, I don't think. And what do I blurt out without thinking? The flipping Air Force in 1800. Was one of those moments where I said it and immediately realized I was an idiot. It took a second for everyone to realize what I said, and we all laughed about it for at least 5 minutes. Teacher made a joke along the lines of, "Today, the Air Force, tomorrow, NASA." I now get called Space Cadet every time I walk into his class wearing some sort of NASA t-shirt.
I love the idea of early 1800s Air Force. Just consists of some, carrier pigeons and people saying what they can tie to different birds. "Ah, have you heard? I believe the French have gathered albatross and are tying very large rocks to them that they can drop." Oh. Early Air Force. I'd join.
Story 8. I once had a friend in 8th grade. It was 5th period reading, and he was talking to the person next to him. And as usual, he said the F word nice and loud. The teacher hears this and said, "Watch your language." He then pulled out his Chromebook and pulled up a YouTube video to the English language. The teacher then responds, "What are you doing? We are not to be on our Chromebooks right now. We're supposed to be reading right now." He then responds, "I'm watching my language, just like you said to do." Drill instructors/drill sergeants, what's the funniest thing you've seen a recruit do that you couldn't laugh at? Viewer edition.
"All right, you bunch of lily-livered losers. That's not a drill sergeant, that's a pirate. Hey, we wanted to know your stories about times when drill sergeants and instructors wanted to laugh, but they couldn't because of something. That whole intro got goofed up. Whatever. Story 1. I remember in high school I completely half-butted the ASVAB test and somehow managed to score incredibly high. For the next few months, every branch of the military kept hounding me on Facebook Messenger at school and even phone calls from my dad, who was a retired major at the Air Force. I never really thought about joining the military, mostly because I'm a 100-pound string bean with high-functioning autism. Everything changed one day in the lunch line at school when I heard, "Look, there's Tim!" From across the room, I saw all the guys, mostly jocks, and a recruiter who ran up to me and did the generic, "Have you considered signing up for the Marines?" And I said, "I don't know, would you like to have a recruit with Asperger's?" Never heard from them again. So I can kind of relate to this. I actually also scored extremely high on the ASVAB test. I can't remember what it stands for, but I was hounded by everyone, but particularly the Navy, who wanted me in their nuclear field training program or something. I was getting weekly calls, and it was kind of obnoxious. And I had kind of considered it at first, because I was like, oh, wow, cool thing. Then at the very beginning of my senior year, something happened on the 11th of September. I can't quite remember what, but I got a little scared about war and decided maybe if I was scared of war that the Navy wasn't for me. Story 2. First day of training. Drill sergeant goes down the line yelling and dressing down everybody. He gets to one person who doesn't seem bothered by the yelling. Drill sergeant gets in front of the private. "Is my yelling bothering you, private?" Without a hint of a reaction, the private yelled, "No, drill sergeant, you just sound like my mother, drill sergeant." There was a moment of silence when you could have heard a pin drop. Then drill sergeant does a sidestep and resumes, dressing down the next guy in line, as if that had never happened. That's one of those moments where you have to wonder, does the drill sergeant respect that kind of moxie? Or is the drill sergeant just planning some bigger and more devious way to get back at this private? Either way, I love it.
Story 3. Never was a drill instructor, but while I was going through boot camp, we were at the end about to graduate. One of the recruit's family had sent him a Navy teddy bear that sings. We were in the Marines. So our drill instructor commented, "Oh, I didn't know this was the Navy. Good, you're in charge of making sure this bear never stops singing." No one could control their laughter in the squad bay. As we went to sleep, the drill instructor would constantly come out of their den and say, "I don't hear my music," as the recruit had the bear singing the song again over and over. It took about 2 hours past lights out for everyone to get to sleep as we were all laughing our butts off. Telling the story honestly doesn't do this justice, though, because you just had to see it. Probably the hardest I'd ever laughed in my entire life. Story 4. Finished basic training for MCRD Paris Island a few days ago. During our crucible, my platoon was low crawling through the mud since we weren't patrolling through the tree line properly. Our drill instructor ended up telling me to get up and run to the end of the trail. When I got there, he made me scream, "Come on guys, you got this, I'm your biggest cheerleader, whoop whoop!" over and over again for 2 hours straight. Good times. Story 5. My dad had a story from his army days where any time their sergeant didn't have something for them to do, he would tell them to clean every speck of dust from their sleeping quarters. One day, my dad and some others had cleaned everything before he got to them, so when he told them to, and they said they already did, the general checked every square inch of the room, over and under every piece of furniture, and eventually he left, came back with a ladder, grabbed some dust from the ceiling, and told them to clean it.
I gotta tell you, I know drill sergeants, instructors, whatever, do this kind of stuff to, get people prepared for, being super good at following instructions and doing things even if you don't think you need to because you were told to and this and that. I do feel like this is really pushing it, and at this point it's like, come on, drill sergeant, really? Come on.
Story 6. My dad was in the Air Force for almost 40 years, reached the rank of lieutenant colonel. He flew fighter jets for most of it. His call sign was Shrimp because he's a 5'4", half Cajun, half Japanese man from a small town outside of Baton Rouge, Louisiana. His partner was a woman from Kansas called Dionge, and her sign was Dong, and a man back in training had the name of Horror. My dad thinks he got off easy with Shrimp. Story 7. Recruit story from Fort Jackson. During the first 72 hours of basic, the DS woke us all up with a big butt speaker on his shoulder, blasting the Barbie Girl song. After a minute of playing it, it stops, and the drill sergeant says, "Front-leaning, rest position move. Trainees, when I say down, you say I'm a Barbie girl. When I say up, you say in a effing Barbie world." The entire bay was dying of laughter.
Okay, first off, Barbie Girl by Aqua. Amazing song. I mean, it's terrible, but it's amazing, and I love it. But what is even better is if you go on YouTube, I think it's a Danish or Dutch or something version of Barbie Girl. It sometimes gets mislabeled as German, but it is not. But I highly recommend you go and listen to that, because the guy who does the voice of Ken sounds out of his mind, where, it's like, "Hey, Ken, yeah, Barbie?" And the German one is just like, "Hey, Spätze." It's great.
Story 8. So, not my story, but a friend's. I was a recruit at the same time he was. Apparently us recruits are nothing but chaos in basic. I was sitting in a smoke pit on a joint forces post hanging out with my Marine friends, and he shared this story. So, in his basic, he had a friend who was dumber than a box of hammers. Said friend had a really, really crusty special sock that hadn't been cleaned in a long time, but was well used. Health and wellness come around, so the drill sergeants inspect the barracks for any contraband or weird crap. This Marine stashed his special sock over the ceiling tiles, which happened to be one of the millions of places his drill instructors check. His drill sergeant is poking at the tile with a friggin' broom, and the other drills are in there inspecting the same bay of Marines. This sock falls and makes a super audible smack sound, and all the drills saw it, missed his campaign hat, and hit him in the face. The other drills ran out of the bay to try to muffle their laughter, but they failed. They were audibly dying of laughter, and one sounded like he was about to choke, he was laughing so hard. The drill who got hit annihilated the entire bay and refused to talk about that day. Rumor has it he went to the bar and drank himself into oblivion before going home after work. I mean, I just remember singing "Little Nee, Sweet Dreams Are Made of Weebs," and this is Halloween. A drill walked in and slowly back away as I was murdering all of his brain cells. Come to find out, he's a bigger weeb than I am. Please leave your story in the comments. I would love to make a video on them in the future. Also, don't forget to like and subscribe.